So welcome everyone to a Climate-Wise Communities webinar by Ku-ring-gai Council. On behalf of Council, I recognise the traditional custodians of the land, past and present, on whose land we stand. Ku-ring-gai Council is proud of its Aboriginal heritage and culture, and we especially recognise this in my welcome to you. My name is James Chan. I'm a Sustainability Project Officer here at Ku-ring-gai Council. And joining us today for this a bushfire simulation workshop is Dr. Jenny Scott. Over here. Hello. We have Mark Schuster, our bushfire technical officer. We have Sam Tucker from the New South Wales Rural Fire Service, the Ku-ring-gai Brigade, and we have Adam Perry from New South Wales Fire and Rescue, and we have Michelle Harris, also from the New South Wales Rural Fire Service. So, just a bit of general housekeeping for the webinar for those who haven't done one of these on Zoom before. We have a Q&A function, which you should be able to see at the top of your screen. So if you have any questions you would like us to answer for you, pop those questions into the Q&A and we should be able to, we'll get to those at the end of the workshop. If you have any technical questions or issues, please put them into the chat. Again, you should be able to see that chat box somewhere on your top of your screen or at the bottom, depending on your version of Zoom. And I think that's pretty much about it in terms of housekeeping. It's much easier than doing it in a face-to-face setting. So now, as people are, well, I think we have a fantastic attendance tonight. So far, we have 110 people with us today. So what we'd like to do at the start of our workshops is to just launch a short poll, a 10-question poll, to get an idea of where you are in terms of your bushfire preparedness. So I'll launch that poll now. And like I said, it's only 10 questions. I'll talk you through the poll. So on your screen, you should see the poll. It should pop up any moment now. So some of these questions might not apply to you, some of them will. So if they don't apply to you, just click NA or unsure or doesn't apply to you, and then go down to the next question. Every question needs to be answered for you to submit your answers. So do your best to answer whichever question relates to you. So I'll talk you through them now. So first off, do you live in a bushfire prone land or ember zone? Again, tick whatever applies to you. If you're unsure, tick the unsure button. Have you experienced bushfire before? Again, yes or no. It's pretty straightforward. And do you have a bushfire survival plan? Again, choose yes or no. If no, what do you think is holding you back? You can choose more than one answer if you like. Now, if you already have a bushfire survival plan, just tick NA, I have a plan. That's the first option under question 4. And under question 5, where do you keep your plan? So this is if you already have a plan. Oh, sorry, Sam, you have a question?
James, comments are coming up that nobody can see the poll that you're talking about. Yeah,
sorry,
it's not coming up on their screen.
Okay,
yeah.
Sorry, I forgot to actually click launch it. I brought up my screen. So
there we go.
There you go.
All up there, all good.
Okay, cool. Anyway, so you've heard me go through the first few questions, so you should have a head start now answering those. Let me see. So go ahead and answer those first few questions. And if you have any questions, of course, just pop them in the chat. And thanks, Sam and Adam, for letting me know that the poll wasn't appearing on your screen. So the one question 4, if you don't have a plan, what is holding you back? Again, more than one answer is fine. And if any other reasons that's we haven't covered in this, please let us know. And it could be a whole range of different things. So as much information as you can provide us, that'd be great, because it helps tailor our program to your needs. And it's perfectly okay to say feelings of fear and uncertainty. It's a very common feeling when it comes to doing bushfire survival plans. No one really wants to do one because it's an outcome most people would rather not think about. So that's totally fine. So where do you keep your plan? In your head, written down, shared with the family and friends, in a locked box in the basement. Yeah, that's always a thing. Question 6: if I think, how confident are you of your plan? And again, it's okay to say not very confident. That's a great place to start. It means that you're open to improving your bushfire survival plan. And that's where we are here to begin with. Question 7 is pretty straightforward. Question 8, again, modifying your house. Put down whatever you applies to you. Again, if we haven't covered a particular option, please put what you've done into the chat so that we have a good idea about what you did. And how well do you know your neighborhood? That's a great one as well. It's pretty straightforward. And lastly, what prompted you to attend the workshop? So Mark Schuster, myself, and Dr. Jenny Scott went around the Twin Creeks area, around Ox Valley Road, Connemara area, and Kissing Point Road, dropping flyers and into your letterboxes. So, you know, we'd like to know, was it the letter that was the main thing that made you want to book into the workshop? Or was it the flyer? Are you a more visual person? Does that kind of material appeal to you? Was it both? Was it an advertisement on council's Facebook page? And again, if there's anything else, like a banner or any other thing, like a school presentation on bushfire that made you think about attending this workshop, please let us know, because it'd be great to find out what motivated you to join the workshop. Because we've had a fantastic turnout today. So far, we're at 117 people or households attending. So it'd be great to find out what was a key motivator. Or maybe it was the Canoon Road fire 2 years ago that made you want to join the workshop. Okay, so we still have a few more people yet to answer the survey. The numbers of people answering the poll are still ticking up. So we might hang here for a little bit longer. Is there anything any of the panelists would like to talk about briefly while we wait for everyone to fill out the poll? Is there anything else you guys like to talk about? Or Jenny, do you want to give a rundown of how the workshop's going to proceed while we wait for people to fill in?
Okay, sure. Thanks, James. So the Climate-Wise Communities Workshop, which is the name of this particular program that Council runs, has been going for about the past 10 years. And during that time, we have continually improved the Climate-Wise Communities website and integrated more and more materials and lessons and innovations and technical improvements as they've become available for us to use. So at this point in time, Climate-Wise Communities is a standalone website, and we do these workshops. I think this is about the 7th one this year, to allow people to see in their specific area. We drill down into areas where there is a high bushfire risk, and see what might happen when we do a simulation of a fire using the sim table which Council imported from America. So you'll see that we normally use it live, and you can actually touch this thing and help build the valleys and the contours of the landscape that we're looking at. But of course, virtually, we just have to show it to you in a 2D format. It is designed to be a 3D format, but we'll talk more about that as we get to the point in the workshop where we use the sim table. So,
okay,
ready to go?
Yeah, I think so. I think most of the people who want to answer the poll have answered, so we're up to 80%. So I think we'll end it now. So in the poll now. So thank you so much for answering those questions. So just a quick survey of some of your answers here. I think 63% of people who answered the poll live on bushfire-prone land. So that's hardly surprising given the area we targeted. So we'll end it now, and we'll move on with the rest of the workshop. Okay, over to you.
Okay. So what we're going to do in today's workshop, divided up broadly into 2 sections. The first section is we take you through an image of an actual fire that has occurred in the past, just to show you how dynamic these fires can be. And then we'll show you a simulation of a fire in Ku-ring-gai. Now, these are very extreme examples. We look at maybe worst case scenario. Hard to know what that is these days, because with the way the weather's going, climate change, worst case just keeps getting worse. So we're looking at an extreme event that could potentially occur in Ku-ring-gai. And on this occasion, we're looking at something that could impact that Twin Creeks area. So you'll see when we move to the sim table, we'll bring up that Twin Creeks area and we'll pretend a fire has started there, and we'll show you as the weather changes and the vegetation changes, how that fire behaves and how unpredictable these things can be, and why sometimes you don't get any warning about the fire because they can behave in these erratic ways. So we'll also be talking with all our different participants here that are contributing their time and expertise to the workshop. Mark is Council's bushfire officer, and he can answer any questions about Council's role in the whole bushfire preparation and response scenario. Adam can speak on fire and rescue and their role, and Sam and Michelle will talk about the things that RFS does in these events and the sorts of things they will be doing. Now, what we really need you to think about is what you will be doing at different stages of these this fire that we're going to show you. That's the critical thing that we're here for tonight, to help you understand what it is you need to plan for. But first of all, we're going to look at an extreme event that happened in North America. We have an example of the Gosper Mountain fire as well, but we're not going to run through that one tonight because we want to get a lot more detail around that particular event in terms of weather change and response, etc. So we're looking at one from North America that occurred in 2018. And this particular fire is a standout because it is the worst fire that's occurred in Californian history, even till today. There's been none worse. And it's the event that everybody refers to when looking at a worst case scenario, at least what we understand to be a worst case scenario at this point in time. So I'll get James to bring up the map of the fire. He's doing his dynamic stuff.
Yeah, I have to get the enable screen sharing.
Okay. James is working two computers at once. All right, so here we are. We're looking at the area of Butte Creek and the township of Paradise. I think we have to scroll out a bit, James. Zoom out a bit. Just a little bit close. So there we go. So you'll see in the middle there is the township of Paradise, and it's the main one we're concerned with. But also Polga and Concow were impacted by this fire as well. So they're the ones we're most interested in. So this happened in November in 2018, and it was autumn in their country at that time. And this particular fire was happening in a time of very low humidity, very high temperatures. The fuel on the ground was very dry. And this is quite mountainous terrain with tall forests. And the hot winds were blowing off the desert. And it was a red flag warning day, which is equivalent to our extreme or worse fire weather warnings. So they knew if a fire started on this day, it would be very difficult to control. So 6:15 or so in the morning, they noticed smoke coming up just north of Polga in a little area called the Camp Road area. And this particular smoke was coming from a fire that had ignited due to fallen power lines. Even at this early hour of the morning, the winds were gusting over 80 kilometres an hour. And they dispatched the firefighters up into the mountain area to try and get at that fire, but the steepness and the windy mountain roads made it impossible for the fire trucks to actually reach the fire. In addition, they couldn't put aerial firefighting appliances up because there was the winds were too high. Now you can see this fire has already started to spot well ahead of the fire front. It spotted up there to the north of Con-gai. The warnings that were going out at this point in time were telling people in Paradise they had nothing to worry about, that the fire was well to the north of them. But of course, as this fire unfolded, the spot fires that were running ahead of the main fire started to blow more toward the south. And you'll see shortly a number of spot fires ignite just to the east of the township of Paradise. Now, the township at this point had no warning. And so when the fires ignited right on the very edge of town, they started putting out their emergency warnings as well as their evacuation plan. But the problem was the cell phone towers in the area had come down. So most people were not receiving. In fact, over 90% of people didn't receive any warning that this fire was on their doorstep. Now you can see under these weather conditions, the fires are building very rapidly. Now this is the actual footprint of the fires as they occurred. And you can see the fire's only been burning a short time, less than 3 hours. And already this fire has progressed about 20 kilometres from where it started. So the fire is burning on the eastern side, and you can see all these spot fires starting down that eastern side. Now, as these spot fires build, they begin to cut off the exits to the north. And as the exits to the north are cut, people are looking for alternatives. Now, it became quite chaotic in the town with the firefighters just trying to get people out of the way. They very quickly gave up on trying to fight the fire because it was building so rapidly. Now you can see to the southwest, where the other major route out of town is, there are another set of spot fires building. So we've got this major fire front to the east, starting to burn into the township proper. And we've got the exits to the north cut, and now the exits to the west are cut. So you can see very quickly the people in this township are being isolated, and stay and defend, or at least stay in your car wherever you were, because there were a lot of people on the road, was the only option. And very quickly, this fire starts to build its own weather, and you can see the town is being pincered between two fire fronts, the one building up to the west and the massive one to the east coming through, and then more spot fires starting within the township area itself. Now, when this fire would finally have got through this town, in the first 4 hours of this fire, there was over 18,000 houses destroyed. There was over 80 people killed and more than that injured. So this fire is also gone down in history because it's about the most expensive fire in terms of both insured losses, around $16 billion, and another $4 billion in uninsured losses. So it was a massively expensive fire. There are a lot of videos that you can search for on the internet. Just type in Campfire 2018 and you'll be able to see some of the documentaries that have been made since that fire happened. Now, these kind of fires where you get this dynamic situation that just outpaces anything that the response agencies can put in to protect or reduce the fire. If they'd been able to get to that fire, if the wind hadn't been blowing so hard, they could have got their aerial appliances up. If they could have got the people on the ground, could have got to it. But it was one of those perfect storms where everything that could go wrong did go wrong, and the result was catastrophic. So the reason that we show people this is because we want people to plan for this kind of an event. Now, if an event of a smaller or less intense nature happens, that's great. You'll be extremely well prepared for it. But if we prepare for something of this scale and of this speed and this intensity, then we know our bushfire plan is pretty robust and it will stand the test, which is the point we're coming from when we simulate this kind of an event that could happen in Ku-ring-gai. So I'll just hand over to perhaps Sam. We'll start with you. Is there anything you'd like to say in relation to this?
I think one thing to draw a comparison with is that this landscape has a highly flammable vegetation type, not unlike Ku-ring-gai. So I think assuming that an area has not had a fire history before does not guarantee that there's not the chance, particularly with the changing climate, that your backyard could burn as well. So I think being prepared for the worst case scenario is always the best place to start. You can only go down from there.
Thanks, Sam. Adam, anything you want to add?
Sorry, Jenny, just caught on a phone call. I'll come back to you if that's all right.
Okay, no worries. What about you, Mark?
Yeah, I'd like to add, particularly in that Twin Creeks catchment where many of you good folks are from, there's a lot of steep topography, and if many of our houses, remember, are either mid-slope or at the top of a slope, and fire will double for each 10 degrees in slope, that both the intensity and the speed at which it comes up. So fires can move very rapidly. You've got to remember that. So, yeah, I'll tell you a bit more further on, but that's my point, I suppose, for that terrain there. Thanks.
And Michelle, any points you want to add?
Nothing at this point, thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Okay, so we're going to finish with the campfire, and we can move on to have a look at a quick view of the Gosper Mountain Fire. Do you want to do James? James is going to be brave and show us the Gosper Mountain Fire. It just means he has to control two computers at once.
Well, it's more of a case of looking at the image clearly from if everyone can hear me from over here, I can do a rundown of the Gosper Mountain Fire. So if that's a thumbs up from Mark. Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah, sort of clearly, James. It could be a bit better, but yeah, not too bad.
Yeah.
Okay. All right then. Well, what I'll do is I'll just show you some work I did to get the Gosper's Mountain Fire on to the sim table. So what I'll do is instead of talking, I tend to talk a lot, so and I'm quite aware of that. So what I'll do is I'll just play it and play it at fast speed, just to give everyone an idea about how big this fire was and what a threat it was to everyone living on the North Shore. So I'll play it at I think it's 3,000, over 3,000 or 33,000 times normal speed because it's quite a long fire. So this fire, as you know, was started in the Gospers Mountain region back on the 26th of October 2019. So I'm just reloading it now just to make sure it works. So just bear with me.
So this particular fire was started by a lot of you might have seen it this fire in New South Wales history. And we were just extremely fortunate that it wasn't in a more heavily populated area.
Well, it seems like the Gospel Man Fire doesn't want to play ball with us today.
Right.
Jenny, we can't hear you well.
Okay, James has struck a technical hitch, so the fire won't play. So we'll just tell you what you would have seen is a satellite image of the Gospel Mountain Fire playing out as it burned across the landscape. And what it does show us is that that fire went for weeks at a time, barely moving, and at one point, because of a rainstorm, was almost extinguished, only for 48 hours later for it suddenly to take off and just roar through different areas, spotting ahead. And it spotted several major other fires as a result of its travels. And it burned down to Wiseman's Ferry. It was only a day away from hitting Ku-ring-gai. And Sam, yeah?
Yeah, no, I agree. It was one of the biggest fires I've ever attended. It when it looked like it was going to impact on Wiseman's Ferry, they lost all power, so they weren't able to get emergency warnings there. So we actually had to have people manned at the ferry to prevent them crossing the river and going into potential danger. And the fire came to the ridge line across from the ferry dock, and it was actually quite frightening for everybody. It was a very long, extended fire where there was extreme community fatigue from dealing with it for 6 to 12 weeks. It was exhausting for all of us.
Yeah, so you can see there James has got it going. So it's just showing you now that it's radiating out from the point where it struck, the lightning strike hit. And ticking over down the bottom there are the days that you might be able to see if you've got good eyesight, better than mine. But you can see the date ticking over and the hours. So you can see how the fire starts to take a run when it hits certain areas. That's partly due to the weather and partly due to the terrain. The yellow is the fire front. The orange and the red are where it's fully involved in fire, and the black in the middle is where it's burnt out. So you can see this fire is growing quite rapidly, and how it suddenly takes rapid runs. And this is where you start to understand how quickly these fires can not only expand, wow, that was fast. How quickly these fires, not only how they expand, but how the spot fires start all these new fires in a whole nother area that can join up, which is what they did in this case, and become a massive fire front. So it's an interesting one to contemplate, that we have seen a fire of this scale and this nature occurring right on our doorstep. So again, it just reinforces the need to have good plans in place and to know what you and your family would be doing at any point in time. No matter what the circumstances that occur, you know how to handle whatever's happening. We also will look at how you can make your house, your property, more resilient to fire, so that the best option in nearly every case is to leave early. And we want you to be fairly confident that your house will be well prepared enough to withstand the fire, even though you're not there. So we'll look at that as part of Climate Wise Communities as we work our way through the simulation of the Ku-ring-gai fire, so that you can see what it is that you can do to give you that confidence to leave your house. So that's the footprint of the fire, where it burned. And as I said, it's the biggest fire in New South Wales history, and it did do quite a bit of damage, but nothing compared to the campfire in the US, even though it's a smaller fire. Okay, so we'll now switch over to have a look at the local Ku-ring-gai area. And of particular interest, and where we'll zoom into, will be the Twin Creeks area, because that's where we've been focusing the promotion for this workshop. So we'll just move in.
The technical variables will be working on. But it's telling me that this scenario has been used by someone else.
Oh, right.
That's a new one. I haven't come across that one yet.
Okay. So whilst we fix this issue, has anybody got any questions they'd like to ask any of the panelists at this point? Okay, I can't see any questions. Good. So we'll just come back and hope. Adam, did you want to add anything at this point?
I was just going to go back to some questions that came up a little bit earlier that Mark did say. Question that came up was, how often do you practice your bushfire survival plan? Now, nominally that should be something that everyone that lives in the house should be aware of. Practicing it once every quarter would be something that would be recommended, especially at the start of the fire season and possibly before Christmas. There was another question in regard to the role of CFUs. Now, CFU is a community fire unit. Within this particular area of Ku-ring-gai, the community fire units are all fire rescue, though in other areas they could be either RFS or fire rescue. And a community fire unit gives you some training on how to use the hoses, the pumps, ship's downpipes, prepare your properties. They are used prior to a fire front arriving, but should a fire front come through, you bunker down and then come out afterwards and mop up or black out any spot fires that are still lingering, allowing the fire services to follow the front of the fire.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Adam. All right. So James has dealt with the gremlins. We're going to show you this fire. I see another question from Victoria. We might just address that before we begin. Anybody want to answer Victoria's question? Okay.
As with your bushfire survival plan, you should always have a number of levels to that. If the fire starts just down the road, such as it did in 2019 in South Turramurra, the emergency warning that came out was to stay shelter in place, which is to shelter within your own property. It's definitely better to stay out of your car because on days like that, you have multiple fire trucks attempting to get into where the fire area is. Not to walk, but stay within a sheltered component of your house, which is part of the plan, which is nominally the areas furthest away from where the fire is impacting, so the other end of the house, in a safe spot where you still have an area that you can exit. Do you want to add anything to that, Sam?
I think only to assume that if you do leave as the fire impacts, it's very likely you won't be going anywhere. So just as Adam has said, I think having a really robust fire plan and understanding that if, like at South Turramurra, where the fire started and almost within 3 to 5 minutes there was an emergency warning, shelter in place, have the expectation that you can actually shelter in your place and know where that will be ensuring that everybody in your family knows where that is, and that you have fires near me on your phone so that you can be alerted the minute that a fire activity in your watch zone actually starts, so you can be prepared as much as possible. Assume the worst, I think, is, you know, we're very lucky at South Turramurra that that community had fire and rescue, the RFS, and a variety, and the ambulance and police service to actually support and protect the community, and the lovely great big planes that dropped the pink bits all over South Turramurra to keep it safe. But that won't happen every time, and there may not be a fire truck to save every street. So have a plan for yourself and your family, and look out for the people in your community to protect them too that need help.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Just before we go on, Jenny, sorry, I'll just go back to Jeremy's last note there in regard to the fire sucking out the oxygen. Yes, the fire, a very large fire can suck out a lot of the oxygen, but it was, and that this question could come out of the recent documentary by the ABC Fires. But yeah, the aim is to get down low, shelter within the ground floor with you laying down so that you have the most clean oxygen that's within the house. The extreme catastrophic events of the 1920 fire season were in certain areas very huge. They were huge fires. Within our area here, we do have fire runs, but nothing that could build up to the extreme sizes that some of the country towns that unfortunately got decimated. I can't see them running that hard in a short period of time.
Okay, thanks, Adam. I also understand it's more to do with the heat of the air that makes the breathing so difficult than the actual oxygen content. But we'll keep going with our simulation. So here we have the Twin Creeks area, and we'll start a fire in the vicinity where fires have started in the past, down below those tennis courts in that area. We'll potentially have no apparent cause. It might be a lightning strike, it might be arson, it could be all sorts of accidental ignitions, but we'll say it started here. And you can see now that the fire's been lit and it's starting to get some size about it. And at this point, Sam, what would the RFS be doing?
So on any day of extreme or catastrophic fire danger levels, we would have preemptive strike teams being available to our station within 20 minutes. And a strike team is a collection of 5 trucks. Any fire event, we would send a crew to investigate without putting our crew at risk. So if we could have a line of sight from a viewpoint, we would investigate the size of the fire and the location, and almost immediately that incident would be reported back to fire control and listed on Fires Near Me. In this event, I would imagine it would be a watch and act rather than just an alert, as it is so close to the built up area.
Thanks, Sam. Something I should have mentioned earlier is this is the SIM table, and what is built into the SIM table are the different vegetation types in Ku-ring-gai and how quickly they burn. Also, there's a fire behaviour model that shows how the fire behaves differently going upslope compared to downslope, for example. How it will move along valleys and then take a run along the ridge when it gets exposed to the wind. We have built into this model at this point in time very low humidity of less than less than about 20% humidity. We have a temperature of 35 degrees. And you can see that blue wheel up in the top left-hand corner. That allows us to vary the wind speed and direction. So you can see at the moment the wind is coming out of the northwest, and it is roughly around 30 kilometres an hour. So you can see also down the bottom there is a clock ticking over, showing you that nearly 3 hours has just ticked over since this fire started. So if we say this fire is a little bit like the one in California, that it started very early in the morning, so it would now be around 9 a.m. And what typically happens on these summer's days, of course, is the wind starts to pick up a little bit. So I'll get James to lift the wind speed. We'll still keep it coming out of the northwest. And we'll have a look at this point at the ClimateWise Communities website, because the fireys have told us what they're doing. We'll have a look about what it is that you might be doing and the sorts of things that you need to know at this point in time. So we'll bring up the ClimateWise Communities website, just take a brief respite from the fire. James works his magic. Here it comes. Yes, there it is. Okay, so this is the ClimateWise Communities website. Now, what we're showing you on the 3D modelling, or the 2D modelling in this instance, is the potential of a sort of large fire that could happen. So this is the planning tool. How do we know what to do about these things? How do we work to keep ourselves and our properties safe? So we go into this one, which is just the agree and proceed. So I'll move through that quickly. This is climatewisecommunities.com.au. And the first step out of 5 in this is to map your location. So we type into the box there the address of the property that we're interested in looking at, and it will come up with an outline of that particular property, and it will give a different colour coding showing the hazards that this property potentially could be exposed to. So you'll see in this instance, we are just waiting for the map to clarify a little bit, still a bit fuzzy, but at least we do have a clear outline of the property. There is the outline of the property. You can type in your own address and get a outline of your property. The red is the bushfire prone lands, and that's areas that are vulnerable to radiant heat and to ember attack. We have ember attack areas as well, and the blue is floods. So this particular tool covers bushfire, flood and storm, drought and extreme heat. So you can look at the plan for any one of those. Tonight we'll just be looking at the bushfire, but as you scroll down, it'll show you the extreme weather hazards that you should be planning for in that location. And of course, every property in Ku-ring-gai is vulnerable to storm and to heat wave. So you can save that to a PDF. Council doesn't want to know your personal details or be responsible for storing them. So you save that to a PDF on your computer, and then once you move on to the next step, that data will be lost. So we'll move to the next step. And this will be looking at your personal situation. So we just quickly will have a look at this step. It talks about, this is all information that is critical to a good bushfire plan. So do you live alone or with others? Now, when you tick on one of the boxes, it will come up with a hint of why that's important to your plan and what you might need to consider in your plan. So you can see with this one, if you live alone, it says consider if you can help others, but it also will say further down, if you've got transport or you don't have transport, if you rely on other people, how are you going to factor that in? Children need some special planning, and Red Cross actually did have a very good booklet on planning with children in bushfires and then incorporating them into the discussion and into the planning of the bushfire response that you're going to have. So they know their role, and that keeps them much calmer and much happier when they know what they've got to do. Whether you're a carer looking after people with special needs, whether there are health and medical conditions in your house, there are certain issues that need to be factored in. Pets in the household is a big one because there have been more than a few deaths in the past of people staying because they can't find their pet and staying too long, or going back to properties that are already impacted trying to save their pets and being killed that way. So it's really important to factor the planning in for the pets, because we know for a lot of people they're as near and dear as family is, and they will take considerable risks to try and protect and save those animals. So factor that into your planning, your own transport, as I said earlier, English proficiency. Your English proficiency in your household might be very good, but your neighbours may not. So home ownership, if you rent, then potentially you're not going to be able to make the changes that you could do if you owned the property to make it more resilient, in which case you would be very sure that you would want to leave early and get out of the house the precious things that you want to take with you. Understanding about phone communications and knowing that if you just rely on the landline, that when the power goes down now with the NBN, of course, the landline goes down. And if you then rely on mobile phones, that's fine if the towers stay intact. But if the towers come down, as they did in the case in America, then how are you going to get that emergency messaging? You won't be able to use the Fires Near Me app. And this is where we always remind people that the ABC, the local ABC in your area, is the emergency broadcaster, and in Sydney, that's ABC 702. And so monitoring that with a battery-powered radio or your car radio can keep you well informed of what is happening with the fire. So again, we save that information to the PDF, and remember, this is all information you can use when you go and start filling in the template for bushfire that RFS has on its website. So now that we've gone through those first two steps of ClimateWise, we'll just flash back to the fire in the Twin Creeks area and see what it's doing. So we can see what's happened is that this fire has spotted ahead, and we're 5 hours, nearly 6 hours into this fire, and it is starting to expand rapidly. So I might go over to you, Mark. What would council's role be at this point in time?
Certainly, Jenny. Council will be watching very carefully. It will have set up its local emergency management group, and they coordinate with police, ambulance, RFS, fire and rescue, everyone, in fact. And they'll have community messaging going out. Also, Fires Near Me app is so critical, but council will be heavily involved in looking at potential evacuation situations and routes, trying to plan ahead as best as possible, and that requires coordination with all the agencies. So, yeah,
Okay.
we'll be
Thanks,
thinking
Mark.
very hard about it.
What about fire and rescue, Adam?
Fire and rescue would have attended the initial call with, as Sam said earlier, on a day of these temperatures and these conditions, we would have thrown a large weight of attack at the initial fire. We would also be responding to any other calls. We'd be receiving multiple O calls. We'd be responding to all of those around the local area and backfilling our resources, putting strike teams into place. That because as with the RFS, we also on extreme days have at different times have strike teams available, set up to come in and assist. We would have had discussions on a day such as this with our management and RFS manager would have discussed it, and possibly this fire is now a class 2 fire. It would be run out of a combined operations centre, and we'd be assisting with the messaging, etc.
Good. Okay, thank you, Adam. And Sam, anything else with the RFS at this point?
It's very likely emergency warnings would have been issued for South Turramurra and the whole interface that you can see the fire approaching. My guess would be that fire and rescue and the RFS would be engaging strike teams along that interface to put into action property protection if required. And the police would be involved in coordinating any required evacuation. Hopefully, if it were a catastrophic day, as we've seen in North Turramurra, any at-risk assets like retirement villages and primary schools and all educational facilities would already have self-evacuated or not be on site. So that would reduce some of the stress on the community. And by this point, everyone should have put their fire plan into action. Trigger point for a fire plan is generally best to be at a watch and act level. So by now, everyone should be acting on the decisions that they've made in that plan, or going to plan B or plan C, depending on the urgency.
Great, thank you, Sam. So we can see what's happened here now with this fire is that it's spotted way ahead. It's taken a jump right down to the southeast there. And so this fire front is building into quite a substantial front. So what we can see now is it's impacting a range of different urban areas. And one of the issues that we always tell people to be aware of, and Sam has alluded to this, is when we get these big events, it may well be like it was in the 2019-2020 fire, where there are a number of big events around the state and the firefighting resources are very stretched. So it is really important that you understand that you could well be on your own fighting this fire, that there may not be a fire truck in your street. And in fact, when we get into areas where multiple areas are being impacted by fire, it is very likely that you won't have a fire truck there to assist you. And when it comes to a lot of houses being at risk, that's when RFS and fire and rescue start having to make the hard decisions about which houses do they attempt to protect and which houses do they just have to walk away from. And Sam, how is that decision made by the people on the ground?
With great difficulty, not unlike you might at a hospital in the emergency section. We have to triage a street and make a decision based on the best chances of protecting and enabling that property to survive. So if there are 20 houses and 10 of them have prepared well for the impact of fire, and 3 of them have extensive hazards that will cause risk to not only surrounding properties or ourselves, we'll probably have to overlook that property and go to the next one and then return to it if there was the opportunity. But the best chance for us to save your property is if you prepare it. And I'm sure Adam has a similar story in streets that are impacted.
In regard to, depends on our weight of attack, how many vehicles you have. As Sam said, what properties are prepared. It is a very difficult call. Thankfully, I haven't had to make it a structural triage, which is where we assess whether a property is defendable or whether it isn't. And then we defend the properties that are defendable.
Okay, thanks, Adam. So on that note, we might just quickly leave the fire again and have a look at step 3, because it's very relevant to how defendable a property is. And in this step 3 of climate-wise communities, what we're going to look at is just how vulnerable your property is to bushfire. So what we get people to do is just do a little mud map of their property and put some of the features down and have a think about what is a risk in terms of being vulnerable to bushfire ignition. Things such as decks, lots and lots of trees or leaf litter building up in the garden, bark mulch against walls. And the question that always comes up at this point is a single tree a threat? And I think this is a question that Mark would probably like to answer.
Yeah, actually, I've done a whole webinar on trees and bushfire, so very timely. Yeah, often trees that are isolated are far less of a hazard. People have to realise that. But also they can protect from embers. Embers can fall on a tree and actually stop the ember attack, so they can be useful. Where you've got lots of mid-story or what I call elevated fuels, that might be about 2 to 4 metres high. If that forms a continuum, that can really force a fire upwards into a canopy or across, horizontally across the landscape. So yeah, the arrangement of trees and shrubs are particularly important near your property and further away too. So yeah, that's just a quick one. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, so we'll scroll down through this step and we click on bushfire because that's the one we're interested in this time. And the property is divided up into all the different aspects of the building. So you can see here, this particular section looks at the roof. It looks at the design of the roof and the materials of the roof. Now it's color-coded so that if it's red, it's considered a serious weakness in terms of its vulnerability to bushfire attack. If it's green, it's more resilient to bushfire attack. So it's a more positive thing. So whichever one most closely applies to your property, you can tick on that. And again, it will give you a hint as to why that is an issue for your property. For example, if you have a very complex roof structure with lots of gables and valleys, there's lots of places where leaves can collect, lots of little nooks and crannies. And there are also places where embers can penetrate into the roof cavity and set the roof space on fire. And if the leaves are accumulating in there, it will set the roof on fire very quickly. So anywhere where there is even a small gap, embers can get in. Because one of the interesting things is that a lot of the science that's been done in more recent times has shown that as the fire front approaches a house, the internal air temperature is cooler than the outside air temperature, and it starts to create a bit of a pressure vacuum inside. Now, what happens then is that the hot air starts getting sucked in anywhere where there is a gap, even the smallest of gaps in the walls or in the roof or even under the floor. And those embers can get in, be actually sucked into the house, setting the interior of the house on fire. So really working to fill the gaps anywhere on your house is important, and ensuring that as much as possible there is no transmission of air through, as we'll see further down here, things like chimneys and weep holes, etc. So we go on down and you can see we're looking at all parts. You know, if you have roof sprinklers, how effective are they? Now they've been used now for many bushfires, and what they found is that the sprinklers that sit up on top of the ridge line are far less effective than those that are attached to the gutter and create a curtain of water around the house that stops those embers from getting in through the windows, under the doorways, etc. In terms of eaves and fascia boards, again, are another vulnerable part. And as I mentioned before, weep holes, vents, the chimney, that's another spot where embers can get in. And we'll keep scrolling down. And we look at gutters and downpipes. Again, gutters that are blocked with leaves is a source of ignition, and that can trigger the household on fire. And if you have metal gutter guards that are kept clean, and you have one of those little valves that allow you to block the gutter off, and you can fill it with water, then that's much better protection. Again, we look at the walls, the type of material of the walls, what condition they're in. For example, if they've got flaky paint, or they're very dry timber, or if they're brick, or if they're masonry and concrete, something more resilient. The windows and frames, again, are a very important point where with radiant heat, the windows can blow in because they can't withstand the heat. And some people go to the trouble of putting tempered glass on the side facing the bushland, or even better is double glazing. And that's much more resilient, particularly if it has metal frame and not wooden frames. So there again, we look at all those external factors, the external door, the type of door it is, etc. The garage door, which is another vulnerable point, because quite often with these big fires, you have very strong winds as well. We look at the floor and the subfloor space, because that's below the floor. If you store all your stuff under the floor, that's another fuel source for the fire to ignite. Or in some cases, if you've got gaps in the floor, then the embers can be sucked up through those gaps. Verandas and decking are another point of ignition around the house, particularly if you keep furniture on the deck or your barbecue on the deck. And if you do have a barbecue, a gas barbecue on your deck, you would want to move it well away from the house and possibly disconnect the gas bottle and put it somewhere where it's not going to be exposed, or if it does explode, won't set anything else on fire. Outdoors, all the landscaping, the different plants that can be used, etc. What fuel sources you've got in your landscape. As Mark mentioned, how the vegetation is arranged. The water supply, whether or not you've got a pool. The water supply might be a dedicated firefighting tank and a water tank, and you might have with it a firefighting pump. And that water is only used for firefighting purposes. It's a dedicated tank, or at least a partial portion of the tank. Looking at fences and gates, again, fences can make a great wick, leading the fire straight up to the house, depending what they're constructed from. About gas bottles, if they're household gas bottles, turning the gas bottle so that the tap is away from the house. Those big gas bottles are designed to vent when they get superheated. And of course, the gas will ignite and it'll shoot out as a flame. But that's fine if it's pointing away from the house and anything else it might set on fire. So it will just exhaust itself when it runs out of gas. We've put in a few other things down the bottom here. Air conditioners can be another source of embers getting into the house. The house age, anything that was built before 1991 and 2009, they're built to a bushfire standard, but the standard has changed even in more recent times. But if it was built prior to 1991, which a lot of houses in Ku-ring-gai were, they were not built to any bushfire standard. So that would be considered quite a vulnerable house. Little things like doormats, pet enclosures, etc., can also be sources of ignition. So how do you cater for that? And it's always useful to know, if you live very close to the bush, what your bushfire attack level is. Mark, could you just briefly explain what the BAL rating is?
Yeah, the BAL or bushfire attack level varies from low to what they call flame zone. In flame zone, a house supposedly can withstand a full bushfire attack. BAL 40 is a bit lower than flame zone, and the 40 means 40 kilowatts per square metre. A human can take about 3 to 4 kilowatts per square metre heat for about 30 seconds to a minute. So it shows how high that attack level is. Most houses around Ku-ring-gai would be a BAL low to a BAL 19 in that sort of order, which is pretty low in respect of resilience to flames and embers. So just goes to show to look at the BAL.
Great, thank you. Okay, so that is the third step in climate-wise communities. So you've got you understand your risks, you know what your personal situation is. It also, in that personal situation, helps you frame triggers for when to leave. And also, if you are deciding to stay and defend, have a look at step 3 and see, is stay and defend a reasonable thing for this property? Has it really got a chance of surviving an intense fire event? Or is it a suicide mission to stay and defend? And we always encourage people, the best option is to leave early. And if you think your house is very vulnerable to fire, you haven't got the means to do much about it, then the next best thing is to ensure that you have good insurance and that you understand that you may have to build back to a higher standard to satisfy the BAL rating if you build back in that location. And so you can need up to an extra $100,000 in that house cost to build back to that higher standard. Okay, so we might just flash back to the fire, see where our fire is at now. It's not coming up. Oh, there it is. Just took the computer a moment to think about it. Okay, so you can see we've really had a substantial area burnt out. It's been burning for 1 day and 6 hours and 43 minutes. So what I'm going to get James to do, the wind is blowing at 70 kilometres an hour, which is a pretty strong breeze. We'll just get him to pick it up to the maximum, which is around 90 kilometres per hour. And you'll see the fire behaviour starts to change again. Now you can see some of the areas to the north have got quite active fire front, and to the south as well. It's not burning to the east because our wind's coming from the northwest. But what would happen at this point if we changed the wind direction? So what we might do is we might get James to swing the wind around so it starts to come from the south. As so often happens in hot periods in Australian summers, we get that southerly buster. And when the southerly buster comes in, this fire is going to take on a whole new life. and it's going to take on a whole new direction. So Sam, what would RFS be doing at this point?
I don't think we'd be happy, that's for sure. We would be on extreme and high alert. I would imagine if this southerly was forecasted, there'd be large areas in its track already have been evacuated where possible. And we would basically be protecting life and property at the worst, but it would be a very dangerous and difficult situation. Our hope would be that most people would have left the area earlier that morning with the expected change for that afternoon. We've seen many large fire events, particularly down on the south coast, where a southerly change actually creates a massive fire front because it's actually the side of the fire, which is rather benign, can then suddenly become, hundreds of kilometres and join other fires together and other spot fires together and put a larger area at risk. So it's quite frightening, and not only for us, but I've got to say it would be quite frightening for the residents of this area. Have a fire plan and leave early.
Yeah,
Adam?
something I should add here is that what we're showing you tonight is only one of 1,000 different ways this fire could unfold. We're not saying this is how it will unfold. This is just one of many possibilities. There is no way of knowing in advance how a fire might unfold. And in some instances, even with the fantastic technology that RFS has in forecasting fire runs, it can still be quite hard to pin it down. Adam, anything you want to add at this point?
The fire's been going for almost well over a day and a half. It would definitely more than likely be declared a section 44 by now, which is the largest fire with a major controlling from the RFS at Homebush. So the actual fire itself would be managed by all government agencies. As Sam mentioned, most of the properties within the area, the southerly change would have been well predicted. The area would have been basically door knocked with an advisory of what to do in regard to evacuation, where to go. The hospital and a lot of the other nursing homes around the SAM would be have a major weight of resources around them, because effectively we can't always evacuate everyone out of the hospital, and it's a major infrastructure that we have multiple resources at. So unfortunately, a lot of people, as Sam said, it's better to leave early and well prepared home, and left early is still a chance that it'll be there when you come back.
Right, thanks, Adam. Okay, so we're going to go to the fourth step of climate-wise communities. And what we talk about in this step is how your neighbourhood might function in the face of a disaster like this. Now, understanding how your neighbourhood functions takes a little bit of doing. I have to say that community fire units that Adam mentioned earlier do this very well. They understand their local area. They know the people who live in the local area really well, and they plan for how to protect those houses in their street and how to assist those people who may need assistance. They know if old Mrs. Kafup's down the road, who has 3 cats and who will not leave without those cats, they know that well in advance they need to be down there encouraging her to get her cats into their carry baskets and getting her out of there so that she is out of danger, and as are her cats. And that's one less thing they have to worry about when the fire approaches. Now, if the fire doesn't hit, that's great. They can go and bring Mrs. Kafup's back and pop her back home. But understanding your neighbourhood and knowing those people who need help and where the resources are within the neighbourhood, if help is required, is a really useful thing to prepare and plan for. So in this particular instance, the tool is to draw the map of the neighbourhood and just identify those people with whom you might communicate and plan with in advance of a fire. So those people might live close by, or they might live a little bit further away, but they'd be the sort of people that you would tell what you're doing, what your plans are. So they're not going to be affected by the fire because they're not in the area, but they know what you're doing and what you're planning to do. So that's just that backup, that safety backup. There's someone outside the area knowing what you're intending to do. So again, we have a number of questions which will allow you to discuss with your neighbours how you might work together. So first of all, do you even know the neighbours each side of you and across the road? So that's one thing. Getting communication tree going and getting people in a discussion about this. Having the neighbours' contact details is essential, obviously. And then, if needed, can you access the yard of the people around you? Now, they might be away and a spot fire might start in their backyard. But if you can't get to that backyard, there's not much you can do about it. Or, for example, if your neighbour has arranged for you to evacuate their beloved dog, if they're not there, you need to be able to get into that yard. So they would need to organise for you to have access to the area. So elderly and disabled people, we had in a workshop earlier this year, some lovely octogenarians telling us how much they'd learned in the workshop and what they intended to do, and that they didn't have a car, but their backup plan was to evacuate with their neighbour who was 92. So you can see that that's great that the neighbours are working together, but they also needed to have another backup plan behind that in case, and hopefully the older neighbour would have left early and not be there at the 11th hour. So getting to know those neighbours, getting to know the resources they have, particularly people with some training or some equipment that may be able to help, is really good to know in advance, rather than at the last minute be running around and trying to find someone who possibly has a chainsaw or who potentially knows first aid. So as we scroll on down, again, the pets come into it because, again, that is time and time again proved to be an issue that have really caught people out. You know, they plan to evacuate their pet, but when the time comes, in a very stressful situation, pets often hide and it's hard to find them. So you need to have them secured well in advance. And we'll just scroll down a little further. Just a few other things to think about. Are there any potential hazards around the property that could impact your exit route, for example? Is there a timber bridge that you might be relying on to get out, which could easily burn? If the exit route, and we saw many of these down in that Twin Creeks area, if your exit route is heavily timbered, the last thing you want to be doing is trying to get out when the fire's nearby, because a spot fire can spring up at a moment's notice and all of a sudden that exit route is cut. You might not be able to go forward and you might not be able to go back. So you're stuck there. A really unfortunate situation to be in. So you need to plan so you don't get caught in these situations. And then we just go through just looking at what resources your neighbours might have. So this is a tool that you can use to start that discussion with the neighbours and start to develop your own neighbourhood plan. It does repeat some of the lessons that we've talked about earlier, because we want that to include in your conversation with your neighbours. And the last step, of course, is the actual plan itself. So by now, when you've worked your way through this process, you have a huge amount of information and understanding about how you need to plan and what you need to plan for, what risks that you are particularly exposed to in your own household, and how to deal with them. So if you work your way through the RFS's bushfire template for their plan, that's a good tool. There are several others. Red Cross has a multi-hazard one, which also includes storms, floods, and heat waves. Carers Australia has one specifically designed for carers to make sure that they get the person that they're looking after safely out in a timely manner. So we're in the middle of planning ClimateWise 2.0, which will have its own planning tool in it in future. But at the moment, we do direct you to these others, which are very good quality plans. So what we hope is that once you've done your plan, the last step is that you'll come back to this tool and have a look at the what if section. You'll see up the top, there is a little section called what if. And this is a tool developed by RMIT and the Bushfire CRC down in Victoria after Black Saturday in 2009. And they looked at the very few people who did have bushfire survival plans, and that was less than 5% of the people who were impacted, why they almost universally said their plan didn't work on the day. And the reason was because the fire didn't occur in the way they thought it would occur. Now, this is something that we keep coming back to in the training of this workshop, is that you need to be ready for all sorts of different eventualities. Now, in this particular one, you just spin the wheel and it will come up with one of many reasons they found in Black Saturday why their plan didn't work. And this allows you to look at your plan and see if it caters for this. Now, this particular one, it says you see someone is injured. What do you do? Okay, does your plan factor that in at all? How you're going to deal with the situation if there is somebody requiring assistance because they're injured? So there are a number of ways of dealing with that. And that if you're evacuating, it can be that you take them with you. It can be that you get them to a safe place. There's a range of different options that you can think through. But having that thought through in advance, somebody asked Adam, how many times should you practice your plan? You should go through it on a regular basis till you've got to the point where you can not have to refer to the piece of paper, that you can think of it because you're so familiar with the content of that plan. And know that if somebody says to you, oh, that option's not going to work, what are you going to do? You'll be able to draw on the alternatives because you will have thought them through beforehand. Thinking them through, writing them down is the best way to reinforce it in your mind. So one thing we have learned by working with a few psychologists who have worked with bushfire victims is that when a crisis occurs, people find it very difficult to think of alternatives then. If your plan was to leave, then that's your plan. And we were told a story from the people in Black Saturday, whereby this particular couple, their option was stay and defend, and then if it all got too difficult, they would leave. Anyway, the house caught fire. They decided to make a run for the car, but when they got to the car, it also was on fire. So they ran down to the dam, and the husband said his hair caught on fire as he ran down to the dam, and he jumped in the dam, turned around, only to see his wife walking back and getting in the car. Quite bizarre behaviour, but the psychologist said in that moment of overwhelming stress and panic, her brain closed down to going back to the one plan that she knew, and that was to get in the car and go. Even though all these messages were telling her this was the wrong thing to do. So this is why we say it's so important to have these alternatives well thought through in advance and to refresh them. Keep your mind fresh. Keep using this wheel. Keep coming up with all the different things that can go wrong. And I'm quite sure you can add a few to this wheel as well. So that's the what if wheel. That's the importance of keeping things front of mind. Did the wife survive? No, she didn't. Keeping things there so that you can draw on them even in times of crisis. Okay, we go back to the fire, and I think we'll see that it must be close to burning itself out. Having really effective, high quality bushfire plans is your best weapon with dealing with events like this. I can't emphasize enough having the time to think through a good plan and drawing on all these lessons that we've gone through this evening, as well as any you might explore in your own time from the various sources on the internet. So I might just go to Adam. Adam, anything else you'd like to add at this point?
I'm happy to go back to answering some questions that are in the chat and clarify some points from earlier, but in regard to the fire, I appreciate it's a computer simulation, but it is fairly large, and travelling through what is left of the bush pockets that we have in that particular area, I'm sure it's jumping and it's spotting further north as well.
About the questions, if people could put their questions into the Q&A box, that would make it much easier for us to process, because we'll be able to clear the questions as we answer them as well. So that'd be really helpful. So.
Okay, Sam, anything from you?
It's clearly a bad day for Ku-ring-gai, this fire, and it looks like the sand is about to be impacted as well. So, look, I guess you've got to realise that if you feel that you could stay and defend, you need the energy to go for several days. You need to have all the equipment ready and working, and you have to assume that it won't go as you plan. So our experience is that most fires ramp up in the afternoon. So, you know, any of our participants that have, say, children that may be at school on a day that isn't catastrophic, if you're working in the city and your children are at school, you need to have a plan for where they will go, which won't be home. You need to have a plan for your pets to already on a day when there has been fire activity to not be at home as well, because some of these things actually trigger young people to not leave, just like the story Jenny told about the lady following through with her original plan. I just can't overemphasize having a backup plan and then another one and another one, and not only discussing your fire plan with the members of your family, including even the young members of your family. Even young children can be more resilient if they understand the basic details, but to discuss it with your extended family, people that don't live with you, so that everyone is on the same page. Fires Near Me actually has 9 watch zones, so your family members can also keep up to date with fire activity, either where you are or at holiday homes or other places that they're traveling to. So if you share that information with the people that you care and love, it just makes everyone more resilient.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just going back to that point about sharing your bushfire plans with the children, I do some presentation for schools and school children, and it always it never ceases to surprise me how switched on they can be, and how engaged they can be on bushfire planning, and they're more than capable of understanding what the risk is, the need to plan, prepare, and they are experts in their own life. So they know what they want to take with them. They know what they will want to keep close to them to help them feel safe and cope with emotional distress. It could be a teddy bear, a toy, a Nintendo game device, blanket, whatever it is. They know what they would want to take with them so that they can feel comfortable and safe in the prospect their house is lost, or if they have to take shelter somewhere else. Sometimes taking shelter during an emergency can be quite a scary thing. So they can be involved. They can make their own emergency kit, and that's involved in bushfire survival plans like that will also lower the risk of post-traumatic stress for the children and help them readjust to a life post-fire much easier than had they not done that. And they can be active participants in evacuation processes as well.
And that's true for adults as well. The better prepared you are, then the less likely you are to suffer the effects of post-traumatic stress. So that's something to bear in mind as an additional benefit.
So we have some
Okay.
questions in the Q&A box here. Should we just go through
Yep.
now? Okay, so we have a question from Joanne Potts. Where do we evacuate to? Who would like to take that answer, that question? I guess it's all fairly specific to your personal circumstances. If you leave early enough, it could be anywhere away where there's no fire, where there's safe from fire. But I guess that question, I mean, there is that safer places.
Yeah, I think Mark, you might probably be up on this one.
Yeah, there are a number of neighbourhood safer places around within Ku-ring-gai, I think 7, but you shouldn't rely on those neighbourhood safer areas, even though they're more open, because they're still incredibly fire prone. They can't take pets. So it's really a place of last resort. And I'm sure Adam and Sam and Michelle will also emphasise that. That's a place of last resort. They're listed on the web. There's nothing really close in the catchment of creeks.
No. In the event of a large-scale fire like this, evacuation centres would have been set up probably on the 2nd or 3rd day, and those places would be regularly and openly demonstrated on, say, 702, so that people would know exactly where to go. They'd be on the Ku-ring-gai Council website and the RFS and Fire and Rescue help pages. Other than that, I still think leaving early and going to your family member that lives in Enfield would probably be a better bet. Other than that, I guess we often recommend worst case scenario is that you would go to somewhere that had a large open space like Corrie Shopping Centre or Chatswood that has a large asset protection zone, extensive fire protection equipment, and ventilated air so that you're protected from the smoke. Because to understand, I'm sure you all experienced the 2019-2020 fires where smoke actually covered the Sydney Basin for many, many, many weeks. And that was nothing like actually being in the path of the fire. So most of us, and I'm sure Adam as well, experienced weeks and weeks of very thick smoke that we had to deal with, and it permeates everywhere. So being as far away from that as possible is a good thing.
Yeah, and
I
that's a
think
good
it's
point.
also,
That's a
sorry.
very good point, Sam. If you can anticipate how you might react to breathing in smoke as well, that could be factored into your trigger to leave. So that could, prompt you to leave much, much sooner and not wait for the other cues like smoke.
Yeah, can I just add, anyone that does suffer from asthma or respiratory issues, I have a asthma management plan, and even as a firefighter, I'm aware of that, and I'm able to still fight fires. And I discuss that with my doctor prior to every fire season to ensure that I'm on the right track and I have all the medication that I need prior to that. So can I just recommend anyone that does have any respiratory issues to ensure that you do get medical advice prior to needing it, and having everything you need and an action plan to prevent smoke impacting you as well.
Great, thanks, Sam. Okay, we'll go on to the next question. Can you give a good example of an area of your house that is good to shelter in? I can probably help with that answer. Basically, you need to shelter in a room that's on the lee side of the building, so the opposite side to the way the fire is coming. You need to be able to see outside to see what's happening, and you need to have a room that has more than one exit. So if an exit gets blocked, and potentially by the roof caving in if it's caught fire, you need to be able to get out of that room another way. So ideally, you would have a room that have an exit outside as well as one inside, if that's something that you have in your house. Some laundries have that, but also that being able to see outside. So you can see when the fire front has passed, and when the fire front has passed, you go out on the lee side and again, look up into the roof and see if there's any smoke coming out from the roof. And that will tell you whether or not that roof cavity has caught fire. So I don't know if anybody wants to add to that.
Yeah, I'll just add to that, Jenny. As was that we didn't mention earlier, prior to sheltering in your house, you need to close all the doors and the windows, preferably put wet towels below doors to stop smoke coming into the property. This would all be part of your plan, and you would go through that just to practice, and to shelter at the last point on the ground floor. There was a comment earlier, should they shelter underneath the floor? Once again, as was just mentioned, you need to be able to see outside, and you need to be able to get out of that space should something happen. So if it was a basement or a wine cellar, it probably wouldn't be advisable. But if the sheltering is in a room under the ground where you've got a number of exits, then it could be beneficial. But once again, it's shelter in place, remain as low as possible, and preferably have a wet cloth that you may be breathing through, similar to a nappy.
Would it be advisable to maybe buy some of those N95 masks or P2 masks or any of those respirator style ones, and have it as part of your kit?
Purchase a P2 mask, or you could purchase a P3 mask as well. A P3 mask is the next level up of respiratory protection. Once again, it's the biggest thing is being able to see. So you may want to purchase some goggles as well, because the wind can be quite intense during those scenarios. As was mentioned in the chat, sometimes a fire of this magnitude will create its own little weather system and its own winds. So therefore, you may be, as soon as you go outside, you may be buffeted by that wind blowing smoke, embers and dust into your eyes. So any form of respiratory protection and eye protection is always beneficial. As all the bushfire survival plans say, to have cotton clothing, long sleeve, long pants. It comes down to being appropriately attired for the scenario. we all see on the news a bloke in thongs, in shorts and a singlet on the roof trying to water down the top of his roof. As was mentioned before with the bowel ratings, if you're standing there like that, the heat impact hits your body straight away, whether if you've got some long sleeves and long pants, and the jackets, etc., the firefighting ensembles that all the fire services wear, we have a little bit more time that we can manage due to the fact that we have that clothing on.
That's a great point, Adam. In fact, that reminds me of a video we saw from the Black Summer bushfires where it was fire and rescue were fighting a fire alongside RFS, and the fire was so intense that it was the fire and rescue crew, because they were wearing their structural fire PPE. Yep. They were able to withstand the heat, whereas the RFS in a different kind of equipment they had to take shelter behind the building, and that shows you, like, even with so the standard issue clothing like the RFS was wearing, I believe, it can get quite hot, and then you need that more specialist equipment to be able to withstand the heat as well. So.
Yeah, as the participants would understand, we have different levels of firefighting ensemble, personal protective equipment, and there's certain levels that we generally wear at a bushfire, but under extreme conditions we could also wear a structural firefighting ensemble, which does give us that extra level of protection, but we also get very hot inside it, and can't work for as long without having to have a break and release the temperature build up in our bodies.
I might just quickly move on to the next question. Anything I need to do with a gas bottle prior to evacuation? Turning the gas bottle away from the house, the tap away from the house. Anything else, guys, that I have missed?
If the gas bottle is connected to a barbecue, it would be beneficial to disconnect it, move it to a clearer place away from the house, in the middle of the backyard, in the middle of a grassed area would be beneficial.
Okay.
Any flammable fuels, etc., like your fuel for your lawnmower, etc., if it's around the side of the house or in a back shed, is always a questionable item. As I've alluded to in previous forums, my partner's grandparents actually lost their house in Canberra due to the fact that the neighbour over the back fence had a whole lot of paint stored in their back shed, and embers got into there. It caught fire, and with the paint tins going up, it actually caught a number of the properties around it, and they were 4 streets back from the bush interface. So it does come down to the ember attack and making sure your property is prepared. Yes,
that's probably a good point that we haven't mentioned. There's that over 90% of houses are lost to ember attack, only 10% to radiant heat. So that tells you what you need to prepare for is ember attack. Are there any good guidelines to hazard reduction on private property, especially large gum trees close to houses, homes? Mark, I think you've already answered that, but anything you want to add?
Yeah, there are a number of good guidelines, both by RFS and particularly by CFA Victoria, about protecting your house in your own yard with regard to trees and shrubs. There's good landscape guidelines, so there's a lot of material on the web. You could email me if you wish, and I can provide you with more local material. But yeah, there are some good guidelines.
Thanks, Mark.
Actually, on that point, if you don't have Mark's email, just go to the ClimateWise Communities website, and there's a Ask an Expert function there, or a Contact Us page. You can send any of your questions to us via that website, and it will come to me, and I can forward the questions on to Mark as well. Otherwise, you can always contact customer service to be in contact with Mark.
So average time from fire front to burnout, please. I'm not entirely sure what that means.
Is that, I think the fire.
How long is this piece of string?
I think this question leads into the next question as well, in regard to fire trucks taken into account during this simulation. It doesn't appear, this is just fire movement within a simulation. It shows that what we would look at in our weight of attack. Fortunately, on the day in 2019, we had a huge weight of attack available to us. That's not to say that during 2019-20 season, the Sydney Basin was reduced in its resources due to the fact that we had so many other resources dealing with fires on the urban fringe, out in the Gospers Mountain, down to the down Bargo and the Southern Highlands. So it all comes down to how many resources we have on the day to whether or not this fire would be as large as it is, the conditions of the day, whether we could wait a serious attack on it or not, including all the aerial resources that are floating around in the scenario. So
something that I didn't add prior to the start of this was that the sim table is actually used in America by the firefighting agencies to plan their attack on fires. And there's a whole nother side to this sim table that allows you to position fire trucks, to order air tanker strikes, to put people on the ground and look at the effect that they're having. Do we have 3 or 4 hours to show you this? We could show you all the components of it, but we don't. But just know that it is there, that not the council's going to use that, but the firefighting agencies have something similar.
So we have a question from about traffic flow and congestion. I would imagine that traffic flow congestion will be pretty terrible, even at best of times without bushfire. School run will be busy, peak hour traffic to work will be quite busy. So I imagine a lot of the roads around the area are quite badly congested. So it could be even worse during bushfire. So I'm sure anyone else would like to chime in with that one.
Well, the lesson is leave early.
Leave very early.
The lesson is leave early. Most of the schools that your children go to will have, well, all the schools that your children go to will have bushfire survival plans in the way that the school actually acts and operates. So effectively, if they happen to be at school on that particular day, the school has a evacuation plan or a fire plan that they enact. So trying to drive and pick your kids up is probably putting yourself in more danger. During scenarios like this, we would do our best to have police block a number of the roads so that we would not get as many rubberneckers as you can get, because there are plenty of people that see smoke and get in their car and go for a drive to see if they can see where it is. Effectively, the best option, if you are getting in your car and you live in the area, is for you to go and evacuate if that's feasible at that time. But it also comes down to where you are in your bushfire survival plan.
And if it's a catastrophic bushfire danger day, catastrophic fire danger, I believe the advice as well is to not be in the area at all on the day, fire or no fire. Just not be there. Yeah.
And taken off several days.
All Department of Education and independent schools, they will actually close the school for any catastrophic day, which they did during the 1920 fire season. So that's something to factor in well, that kids won't be at school on a catastrophic fire danger rating day, which hopefully will reduce traffic on the road also.
We have a question about streams and vegetation near the streams. I think, yes, some of the streams are like area, maybe Mark could answer this one. The question is about advice for people who live near streams.
Yeah, actually, that's a really interesting question. With small run fires, yes, streams, they're moister, they're more mesic, and the vegetation is often has a lot more moisture in it, so they will help to stop or minimise fire impacts. But with catastrophic weather winds, you've got to remember any vegetation will burn, any timber will burn, so it's not a good thing. So I would emphasise that. So these green fire breaks, they can be called green fire breaks, aren't always advantageous, particularly with the extreme weather we're getting and going into with climate change.
And we saw that rainforests burnt during the Black Summer bushfire.
That's right, where I came from, rainforest burnt particularly well to ash. Yep, thanks.
The last question here that we'll deal with tonight is it better to be on the lee side of the house or the lowest room in the house, if not in the same room? So I guess one or the other, lee or the lowest room in the house, if a fire front passes.
There's one for Adam, I think.
I'll say.
That,
Sorry.
as was discussed earlier, it's more a room that is preferably on the lee side of the house, one that has two exits. So it could be on the lee side, it could be the lowest. It needs to be somewhere that you have multiple exits. You have a view of outside. We say the lowest level due to the fact that the air is the most fresher,
Smoke
down there
rises.
with the most oxygen in it. So yeah, and I appreciate in these areas we have a number of houses which have multiple levels or split levels where the street level could actually be on the second level of the house, where the two levels of the house actually back onto the bush. So it comes down to what every house is different, and people need to be comfortable in where they are and how they see their house in what's appropriate for them to evacuate.
Okay, thanks very much, Adam. So we're coming to the end of our time. So what I'll just get to James to do is talk about Council's rebate program to encourage people to do some retrofit works for bushfire on their house.
Thank you very much, Jenny. I'll just quickly switch over to the Commonwealth Community's website and get to the section about the rebates. So just bear with me while I get there. I'll get there via the rate check. I'll skip ahead. So I'll quickly get there. If the computer is fast enough. Okay. So council has a rebate program. We have quite a few different rebates. The one we have that we'll talk about right now is about, it aims to help residents prepare their house to bushfire. So as you can see, council will offer up to, here it says 10%, but actually it's been increased to 25% of retrofit costs. So for example, if you were to get gutter guards installed on your house or new bushfire shutters or new windows, council will cover 25% of the cost to a maximum of $1,000. However, if you do incur some fees, such as DA fees or CDC fees for replacement windows or replacement doors, council can offer up to 50% of those costs to a maximum of $500. So in total, the rebate available to you is $1,500, depending on, again, what it is that you want to do. To get information about the rebate program, you do the ready check and you come to step 5, and you can click the link there, or you can go to the Ku-ring-gai Council website and search Bushfire Wise rebates. Here you can see how to apply for the rebate program. To apply for it, it's a 2-step process. It's a pre-approval process where you click this button here, the submit your pre-approval application. There you'll be able to upload your bushfire survival plan, which you can get from the RFS website, and step 3 of the Ready Check tool, which you've just seen tonight. So you do step 3, you complete that section, you download to a PDF, and then you upload that as part of your pre-approval process. And then I will get the application, I'll review it, and I'll get in contact with you and have a little chat about what you want to do. And if everything is all good, I can issue you with a pre-approval number, and you go ahead and do the work. And when the work is completed, you submit your final application form and include your invoices and proof of the work being done. And then I will issue the rebate. And there's a few more things involved in that, but that's essentially the main process. If you have any questions on how to claim a rebate, send me an email or via the ClimateWise Communities website or directly. I believe that my email or contact details were on the letter. If not, you can always contact customer service and they can put you in contact with me. So I think unless there's anything else, I think we can end the workshop there. There's nothing else formal to talk about apart from the native beehive prize draw that will be conducted on the 29th of November. So that's all residents all people who attend the workshop who are residents of Ku-ring-gai, they will be eligible for one of 3 native beehives. That's that for me, unless there's something, if there's any other closing comments anyone would like to make.
Just to thank all the attendees for coming tonight. Wonderful to see so many people, and to thank Sam and Michelle and Mark and Adam for participating and giving us their valuable expertise. Thanks so much for donating your time to this. And we'll catch you again next workshop.
And I'll be sending
Thank you, organisers.
Sorry, thank you very much.
Good night, everyone.
Okay. Bye.
And I'll be sending a survey out to everyone who attended as well. So if you don't mind feedback on how we did, that'd be great. And any suggestions on how we can improve that.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All the best. Stay safe, everyone.
Bye.